The sun had already given up for the night when I got home, leaving me with nothing but the glow of streetlights and my roommate's silhouette in the living room. "Hey," he grunted without looking away from his phone. "You hungry?" Well, duh, of course I was. I kicked off my shoes by the door. The familiar thud against the floorboards, a signal that I had survived another day at the office. Starving. He nodded dramatically and set down his laptop on the coffee table. "Great. What do you want for dinner then? Because I'm not cooking anything tonight." I raised an eyebrow as I walked past him, heading straight for the fridge. The hum of the old appliance filled the small kitchen, while I scanned the cupboard's nearly empty shelves. "Pasta's pretty quick," I suggested, pulling out a box of spaghetti and some sauce that might still have been good if we didn't look too closely at the expiration date. "Nope." He shook his head firmly. "I'm on a diet, too many carbs." I slammed the fridge door shut harder than intended. "Then what are you in the mood for? Because I don't remember having a personal chef and an abundance of exotic ingredients laying around." He stood up, stretching like an annoyed cat. "Maybe we could order pizza." "Pizza will take forever," I complained, my stomach growling at just the thought of it. "Yeah, it's Friday night," he agreed. "Every delivery place is probably backed up." I glanced at the clock. 6:32 p.m. He was probably right about the wait times, but still, I don't want to wait an hour for food when I'm this hungry. I opened a cabinet, hoping against hope we had something easy. He rolled his eyes and walked past me into the kitchen. "Fine then, what's wrong with having just cereal?" I stared at him like he'd just suggested eating drywall. Cereal? As dinner? The absurdity of it made my jaw clench. "What's so wrong about that?" He grabbed a box of Frosted Flakes and held it up triumphantly, as if this settled the argument. "It's not substantial," I managed through gritted teeth. "I need something that sticks to my ribs." "Well, you could whip up some Chinese. No soy sauce in the house." I cut him off before he could finish. "We've got ketchup." "I am not putting ketchup on my rice, Bill." The frustration was building now, a slow simmer turning into a boil. He threw up his hands dramatically. "Then what do you want? 'Cause I'm running out of ideas here." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. This wasn't worth fighting over, except it felt like more than just dinner at this point. It felt like everything we'd been avoiding for weeks, the tension between us that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. "Burgers," I said finally. "Let me go get burgers from the drive-thru." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Fine." A pause. "But make sure everything is in the bag before you leave this time." I grabbed my keys and headed out into the evening without another word. I was starving. The kind of hungry where your stomach feels like a hollow pit, gnawing at itself in frustration. I'd skipped breakfast, and lunch had been an apple from the office charity pile that wasn't exactly satisfying. When I pulled into McDonald's, my mouth watered just looking at the golden arches. I was already imagining the salty fries, the juicy burger patties, the sharp bite of mustard on my tongue. My stomach growled in anticipation, as if it could smell it all through the car windows. I pulled up to the speaker and waited for what felt like an eternity before a perky female voice chirped. "Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order?" "Yeah," I said, trying not to come off as overly desperate. "2 Big Macs, 2 large fries, 2 Cokes." "Okay, sir. Just one moment, please." There was a pause that stretched into an eternity while I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel. "I'm sorry, sir. Could you repeat your order? It didn't come through clearly." I took a deep breath. 2 Big Macs. I enunciated slowly, as if talking to a child. 2 large fries, 2 Cokes.
Great, and would you like anything else today?
Her voice was still bright, oblivious to my growing frustration. No, thank you.
And for your drink, we have Coca-Cola, Sprite.
I literally just said Coke, I interrupted. Just give me 2 Cokes.
Okay, sir. And would you like to round up for the Ronald McDonald House charity today?
I was about to explode. My stomach chose that moment to let out a guttural growl that echoed through the car. No, I barked into the speaker, then immediately regretted my tone when she paused. Sorry, I muttered. Just no thanks.
All right, sir. That'll be $14.57 at the first window.
She sounded completely unfazed by my outburst. I pulled up to the window and handed over a 20, and I was already reaching for the bag on the passenger seat before she could even give me the change. My fingers brushed inside the brown paper, but found no warm stalks of fried potato waiting for me. I looked over in disbelief. Big Macs, but no fries. What's going on here? I demanded, turning back to the cashier who was counting my change with infuriating slowness. Where are the fries?
I'm sorry, sir, she said apologetically. There must have been a mistake. Let me check your order.
I waited while she disappeared into the kitchen, tapping my fingers against the steering wheel in mounting frustration. My stomach felt like it might eat through my spine if I didn't feed it soon. When she finally reappeared with another greasy bag, I snatched it from her hand without a word of thanks and sped off towards home, only to realize halfway there that I'd forgotten our drinks entirely. I was so focused on getting fries into my mouth that I barely noticed the car coming around the corner until it was too late. The impact sent me flying through the windshield, glass shattering around me like hail as I tumbled onto the asphalt. I rolled and splayed out onto the pavement, then came to with a jolt, my head throbbing, but thankfully not splattered everywhere. The world spun around me in dizzying circles before finally settling into focus, and what I saw made no sense. Gone was the bustling city street with its honking cars and LED ads. Instead, I found myself lying on a field of black grass that rustled like dry leaves beneath my fingers. Tiny lightning bugs flickered here and there, casting eerie blue light across the landscape. I sat up slowly, fighting back waves of nausea as confusion came flooding over me. The hunger, the argument at McDonald's, the screeching tires, the crash. My gaze landed on what remained of my car, a crumpled heap of metal with shattered glass strewn around it like diamonds. And there was the gaping hole where I'd flown through the windshield, my own personal exit wound onto this bizarre plane. I staggered to my feet, legs wobbling beneath me as if they belonged to someone else, which seemed like a real possibility at this point. This couldn't be real. It had to be a fever dream brought on by hitting my head in the accident. But when I reached out and touched the black grass, it was cool and dry against my palm, far too real for a hallucination. It swayed gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. The blades were as dark as oil slick, their edges potentially sharp enough to cut if touched carelessly. The fireflies drifted lazily above them, illuminating my surroundings with sporadic flashes of light before disappearing into shadow once more. I took stock of my surroundings. The landscape stretched out endlessly in every direction, flat plains of midnight-colored vegetation dotted with the glowing insects casting an otherworldly fuzz across everything they touched. There were no buildings, no roads, nothing but the dark, vegetative expanse and me. I turned my aching neck slowly from side to side, scanning the horizon for any sign of civilization, anything familiar to cling on to, but found only more blackness broken up by those unsettling flashes of blue light. But there was something, a distant line cutting through the darkness like a knife slash, but it wasn't anything recognizable I could accurately decipher. My legs protested as I started walking towards it, each step feeling heavier than the last, despite how desperately I wanted to run away from here, from whatever had brought me into this new existence. I felt heavy and sluggish, my movements slow and clumsy as though underwater. I looked down at myself, shirt torn, bloodied across my chest where glass had shredded the skin. My body clearly had not escaped the crash unscathed either, but it was my mind that worried me. After an indeterminate amount of time had passed, I noticed a subtle change. The landscape began to slope ever so slightly downward ahead of me. Not enough to call it a hill, but noticeable nonetheless, as though some vast hand had tilted this world just barely off-center. The incline grew steeper with each step, until finally I crested a rise and gaped at what lay beyond. A sheer cliff face dropped away into blackness so deep, even the fireflies wouldn't venture near its edge. The razor-thin bridge spanning that gap seemed like something out of a dark comedy, barely wide enough for one person to cross, with no railings or safety features whatsoever. My stomach lurched just looking across the chasm, but I forced myself to breathe through the vertigo. There was nowhere else to go except back the way I'd come, but that wasn't a particularly compelling option either. I took a tentative step forward, peering over the precipice into nothingness below. The bridge itself looked like twisted metal or maybe stone, but it was hard to tell given its precarious position above an endless void. The fireflies seemed hesitant about approaching me now, hovering at a respectful distance as though they knew what was coming next. Or perhaps they were simply waiting for a show. I followed the bridge with my eyes, trying to determine how far it went or how far I was liable to fall. It was difficult to make out, but a figure stood there in the far shadow, waiting. An opaque silhouette that was dimly lit in the same way one can vaguely see the moon on a cloudy night. I couldn't make out any features, but something about their posture felt inviting, or at least more inviting than what I had seen so far. I stepped onto the bridge and began to cross, one pained footstep at a time, the figure waiting patiently for me to traverse the expanse. Eventually, I reached the other side of the bridge, legs shaking from the effort. The figure remained motionless in the shadows, watching me with an intensity I could feel, even though their face was obscured. It took one step forward into the dim light of the fireflies and finally revealed itself. It most definitely was not human, tall and slender with skin that seemed to radiate dimly like moonlit snow. Wings folded gracefully against its back, though they were more delicate and withered than any birds I'd ever seen. An angel? The thought flits through my mind before I dismiss it as ridiculous. It was bipedal and had wings, but otherwise did not conform to any artistic or biblical depiction I remembered. It was too slender, its limbs too long, its face too alien. The creature studied me with huge eyes that contained no visible pupils. I bristled. "Well, what do you want then?" I demanded, frustration edging into my tone despite the fear knotting in my gut. A pause. Then those impossible eyes flickered towards something behind me, and I turned around. The bridge was gone. It had simply disappeared back into the void, as if it never existed at all. Panic rose like bile in my throat, but before I could react, A soft hand touched my arm, a touch so light it felt more like static electricity than flesh against skin, and suddenly the world tilted beneath me again. The black grass gave way to a field of tall, swaying plants that looked kind of like a prairie. Horses sauntered about grazing. Except they weren't quite right either. Their coats were mottled and mop-like instead of uniformly equine, their manes hanging in wild tangles down their necks rather than flowing elegantly. And when I stepped closer to one grazing peacefully nearby, I realized that its eyes weren't black like any horse's should be. They were solid, milky white. In fact, these creatures weren't like horses at all. It was as if they looked just enough like them for my brain to try and make sense of something it could never truly comprehend. I reached out slowly, expecting it to rear or at least flinch away from human contact, but nothing happened when my fingers brushed against its tangled hide. The horse just kept chewing placidly on the black stalks. The fireflies continued their lazy dance around me, casting enough light that I could see the black prairie stretching endlessly. I started walking again because what other choice did I have? My body protested with every step, ribs screaming, head pounding, but I kept moving forward through the sea of shadow grass until, finally, the ground sloped upward and suddenly there was something different. Something solid in this endless void of blackness. A forest. Ancient-looking trees with bark that seemed to melt between silver and rusted iron. And surrounding it all. I approached cautiously, my footsteps crunching on the strange vegetation as I got closer. The gate was massive, easily 20 feet tall, even at its lowest points where it curved inward like a wave. Dark metal that seemed to drink in what little light existed rather than reflect it back. Jesus, I muttered under my breath once I stood close enough to confirm what I already suspected. The entire perimeter of the forest was gated off completely, with no visible entrance anywhere near where I currently existed. I pressed my hands against the cold metal, feeling its strange texture. Smooth in some places, but ridged like Ruffles potato chips in others. There had to be a way through somewhere. No one built something this elaborate just for decoration. The blue fireflies followed me as I began walking along the gate's edge, their light casting thin shadows across my path and making the metal seem almost alive with movement when it wasn't actually moving at all. I walked what may have been miles, though distance was hard to judge here, and still found nothing. No doorways, no gates. The only unusual thing that caught my eye was where the gate curved around a particularly dense cluster of those melted trees. A doorway? No. A ragged archway just large enough to pass through, and beyond it, the forest opened up in a way it hadn't before. There was what appeared to be a proper entrance lined with the same trees I just passed under, but now arranged more deliberately around what could only be described as gates within gates, penetrating the depths of the forest like a medieval arcade. Then came movement from inside the gates, something stepping forward into the dim glow cast by those same passive insects, now filling both sides of the threshold between darkness and whatever lay beyond it. It was the angel, or whatever passed for an angel here, taller than any person should be, androgynous features that seemed almost sculpted rather than born, skin pale as an albino, but lacking the tenderness of actual flesh. It had wings. I could see them clearly now as I drew closer, but they weren't anything like what you'd see in the Sistine Chapel. There were too many for one thing, 6 instead of 2. The feathers, if you could call them that, looked a bit sickly and oily, The being itself stood at least 8 feet tall, with proportions all wrong for any natural creature I'd ever seen. Its limbs were too long, its torso too narrow, head too large in comparison to its body. The face was beautiful but unsettling, too symmetrical and lacking any nuance. I limped toward the inner forest as well as I could manage. The pain was getting worse with each step across that cursed black grass, but I finally reached the spot where the angel stood. The gateway wasn't like a church or cathedral entrance, but more like a medieval portcullis. Twisted iron bars set into thick pillars, covered in symbols and writing I couldn't read even if my head hadn't been pounding. The angel stood directly before it, blocking access completely with an arm that seemed to morph between hard flesh and pure light, depending on how you looked at it. This close up, it was not exactly unsettling, but not something that inspired comfort either. Its eyes were like dark twin moons reflecting the blue fireflies dancing around us both. "Can't go in there." Its voice carried an echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once, rather than just its mouth. "Not yet." "What do you mean, not yet?" I tried to keep my tone civil, despite frustration mounting alongside my pain and confusion. "Look, I don't know what kind of game this is, but..." "You're in heaven?" It interrupted simply, as if stating the weather. I blinked several times, processing the outlandish statement. "Heaven? You've got to be kidding me." I gestured vaguely around us. "This definitely isn't heaven. There's no sun. There's weird horses, and what kind of heaven has black razor glass and fireflies for light?" The Guardian's expression didn't change, but something about the way it looked at me shifted, like watching someone struggle with simple arithmetic. "By your imagination, perhaps not," it said after a few moments. "Your understanding's flawed then. Heaven is not as you imagine." I shook my head, still processing everything I'd experienced since waking up here. The car accident felt like days ago now rather than... How long had it actually been? Time seemed strange here too. "If this is heaven," I said slowly, "then why does it look so disturbing?" The Guardian's expression again didn't change much. Its face wasn't really built for human expressions anyway, but something in its posture suggested understanding. It took a step closer and I instinctively tensed up until I realized there was no threat in its movement. "Perception is reality," it said simply, as if that explained everything. "What you see reflects what is. I'm not sure what else you need." I looked around again at those twisted trees with their metallic sheen, and then back down at my own body, still solid and looking to possess very real scuffs and injuries. "You're lost," I said flatly. "This isn't heaven, I'm sure of it." The creature considered me with those large alien eyes. "And how do you know? Have you been here before that you're able to recognize it?" I snorted. "Heaven's supposed to be nice, peaceful. Not this." I gestured around at the eerie landscape. "Peace is subjective," it replied, unfazed by my skepticism. "What brings you peace? The mundane routines of your world, waking, working, sleeping, or something more?" I bristled at that. "You don't understand anything about me or where I come from." "I understand enough to know that you're here for a reason," it said softly. "That there's a purpose behind your appearance here at this time." "So, if this is heaven," I said through clenched teeth, Why does it feel so wrong? Wrong for whom? It spread its arms wide in a gesture that encompassed everything around us and somehow made me feel small, insignificant. What makes you the arbiter of what's right or wrong? Perhaps this is exactly as it should be. It is only your understanding that is wrong. I intended to argue, but found myself at a loss for words. The creature watched me with that same patient intensity, waiting. I don't have time for philosophy, I finally growled. If there's something you want from me, just tell me. Want? It laughed then, a sound like wind through plastic tubes. You have nothing I could want. You are here for your own purposes. My purpose is to wake up then. I literally just want to wake up, I said quietly after a moment. Or die properly if that's what's happened. Ah. The creature nodded slowly, as though understanding something profound. Then it leaned forward slightly, not threateningly, but with an odd sort of curiosity. But why? Why do you want to leave? It pressed when I didn't answer immediately. What drives this need so strongly that even the possibility of answers does not interest you? I have a life, I said defensively, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. A job I hated, bills piling up, a roommate I didn't really like but couldn't afford to live without. The creature's gaze sharpened. A life or an existence? There is a difference. I clenched my jaw, refusing to take the bait. Very well, it said after another long pause. Then it straightened, those odd wings unfurling slightly, as if preparing for flight. If you won't tell me your purpose here, then perhaps I should ask what you believe your purpose in life is meant to be. I stared at it blankly. It was definitely the kind of inane religious question one would expect from something that's supposed to be an angel. To be honest, I work, I said finally when the silence grew too heavy. I have bills, rent, I need to eat. I was trying to eat. The words tasted like ashes on my tongue. That's it. If I have some time left over to do something fun, great. And I try to be nice to people, but I don't always do that either. The creature's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Pity, perhaps, or maybe just amusement at how small and pointless it all sounded aloud. And what remains after you've paid your debts? It asked gently. How much time and desire is left for truly living? That's the kind of question someone who has the luxury of not working or paying for housing would ask, I countered, hating how small its words made me feel inside this vast expanse of darkness. And it's not up to you to decide what real living or whatever is. The creature nodded slowly, as though expecting nothing more from a mortal man caught between worlds, then reached out one long-fingered hand to touch my shoulder lightly. Perhaps that's why you're here, it said softly, a voice like wind through chimes. To find the answer before time runs out completely. So I'm dead? The question came out quieter than intended, almost a whisper despite being alone here with this creature that wasn't quite an angel. Not necessarily, it replied after what felt like deliberate consideration, but it offered nothing more than that. I stood there, staring at the creature with its 6 wings and blackened eyes. The black grass rustled around me like a whisper of secrets I couldn't quite hear. You're not answering any of my questions, I said finally, looking up to face it. If you're supposed to be giving me some kind of revelation... Come, it said abruptly, starting towards the dark forest looming ahead of us like an endless wall of liquid metal trees. "There is more to see." I hesitated for only a heartbeat before following. What choice did I have here? This thing was my guide, whether I trusted it or not. The bridge was gone, and part of me wanted desperately to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be real. The ground beneath our feet felt different now, softer than it had moments ago when we first met. The black grass seemed almost plush underfoot, as if welcoming us with each step deeper into its embrace. The forest grew closer rapidly. The trees loomed over us, their branches twisting together into intricate patterns of thorny vines and razor-edged leaves that glittered dangerously in the firefly light. "Wait," I called out suddenly as we approached the edge. "What am I supposed to do?" The creature paused and looked back at me with undiminished vigilance. "Do?" It gestured toward the gaping maw of blackened branches ahead, voice echoing strangely as if coming from everywhere all at once. "This is where you find out who you really are." I swallowed hard against a sudden tightness in my throat and took another step forward. The gate yawned before me like an open wound, waiting for something to fill the emptiness inside. And maybe that thing could be me if only I had the courage to cross this final threshold into whatever lay beyond. "Why do you fear this place?" The angel's voice was gentle and unassuming. "I can't," I managed to choke out, stumbling over my own feet as I retreated back into the field of midnight grass. The anxious feeling grew sharper with each step away from those twisted trees. "You ponder about meaning," it said slowly, as if choosing each word deliberately. "But what gives life meaning is not always found in grand gestures or divine encounters. What you seek may be simple truths about yourself, or perhaps something more profound, depending on how open your mind remains." Several questions swirled through my head, but none quite formed into coherent words. "Fine," I finally sighed, accepting whatever I was walking into. The guardian stepped aside gracefully, making room for me to pass. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs for just a moment before stepping forward under its watchful gaze and passing through those bizarre pillars into whatever lay beyond. The change was immediate. Where there had only been black grass, now grew twisted trees with smooth metallic bark. There was movement in my peripheral vision from the darkness, shapes moving among the trees. Some looked human enough, walking with familiar gaits and gestures. Others didn't. Forms that defied easy categorization, their very presence suggesting realities beyond my comprehension. I pulled back, my heart sinking as realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. "Can I just go home?" I asked the angel, even though as the words left my mouth, I already knew what the answer would be. The question felt more rhetorical than anything else, a final grasp at denial of where this path was leading me. The angel's expression softened with something that might have been pity or understanding, or perhaps both. "I'm sorry," it said simply. "That is no longer possible for you." It gestured again. "What lies beyond is not a return to what came before. It is something entirely different and uniquely yours." I stepped through the gate, leaving behind the angel. As I ventured deeper, I noticed more details about this place. Some trees bore fruit that glowed faintly in shades of amber and violet, and streams of liquid silver wound through the undergrowth like rivers of moonlight. But what caught my attention most were the figures scattered throughout, the souls who inhabited this realm. Many walked freely among the trees, with a kind of peaceful purposefulness about them. They moved through tasks I couldn't fully understand, tending to glowing gardens or engaging in conversations that left trails of light behind like written words. But then there were others who didn't move freely at all, hanging from branches throughout the forest, some by rope fashioned into nooses, others bound with what looked like barbed vines. Some bodies were suspended motionless above ground level. Most seemed resigned to their fate, but some struggled weakly against restraints that never loosened. And then there were those imprisoned within dystopian structures embedded in the tree trunks themselves, their faces pressed against transparent walls from which they watched me pass, with expressions ranging from curiosity to despair. I paused near one such captive, a woman, eyes wide as she pressed her palms against the transparent surface separating us. She seemed desperate for connection, but unable to break through whatever barrier held her there. "What kind of heaven is this?" I muttered under my breath, though whether it was meant as a genuine question or bitter commentary, I couldn't say. As if in answer, or perhaps simply because I'd ventured too close, one of the trees suddenly moved. Its trunk twisted toward me with surprising speed and grace. Branches extended outward like grasping fingers before wrapping around my torso firmly, pulling me against its smooth surface. Silent chains encircled me and wound themselves around both arms, pinning them securely at my sides, while another set secured my legs in place, so that I was no longer really standing, even if the tips of my shoes still grazed the ground. The other trees stood like sentinels around me, quietly observing. Instead of panic setting in, I felt a sense of resignation wash over me, feeling my strength and my hope ebbing away. And in this blackness, I tell all of this to you, stranger, since you paused by me long enough to listen. Can you tell me what my purpose is? The preceding tale references a dimension known as the real heaven. It is an extra-dimensional plane characterized by a perpetual twilight dominated by towering metallic flora resembling twisted trees with branches composed of smooth metal that flows like lava. The ground beneath these trees consists of blackened soil and grasses. The only illumination originates from flashing insects resembling small fireflies, emitting a fuzzy blue light. The real heaven exhibits a distinct preference for individuals who have recently experienced near-death events. These subjects are inexplicably abducted into the dimension through localized breaches in reality that manifest as oviform tears in space-time, often appearing directly within hospital rooms, intensive care units, or at the scenes of accidents. Once inside the dimension, affected individuals will find themselves bound by chains of solidified metal projected from within the metallic thicket. These restraints are non-conductive and appear impervious to conventional cutting tools. The subjects remain conscious throughout their imprisonment, but exhibit varying degrees of disorientation and confusion upon initial entry. The real heaven is populated by several paranormal creatures, the most pressing of which are imitation angels. These are cryptid-adjacent creatures diverging greatly from stylized depictions of angels, crafted from the same shapeable metal as the flora. They possess human-like bipedal locomotion and communicate telepathically with subjects via a language understood by the recipient. These entities claim the dimension to be heaven and assure captured individuals that their confinement is a necessary stage in an unspecified process of spiritual refinement. There are also a few terrestrial animal species, notably equines resembling horses, but covered with rough, mop-like hair. Their behavior appears largely undisturbed by the presence of humans. Due to the unpredictable nature of dimensional breaches and its connection to near-death experiences, capturing or reliably locating the real heaven is impossible. Its incursions are monitored through a global network of specialized sensors deployed at major trauma centers and hospitals. These sensors detect fluctuations in localized electromagnetic fields indicative of the real heaven's presence during instances of severe physiological stress or cardiac arrest. While a mechanism to close these breaches is not currently known, one survivor has successfully been extracted. The man, previously experiencing cardiac arrest during surgery, was recovered after an estimated period of 2 months within the dimension. Interviews with the subject are as follows.
Can you describe your experience inside? Where were you taken?
It was like a dream, but not asleep. More like the kind of dream where you have control. Everything felt heavy and slow, even my thoughts. There were these trees, taller than any I've ever seen, made of molten metal almost, and they flowed like rivers, all those twisted branches dripping down into this black grass.
Were there other beings present?
Yeah, things with wings, like angels from paintings, but not quite right. They were always watching. Sometimes they'd come close and talk to me. Not speak out loud, more like voices in my head. Said I was safe here, that it was heaven.
Did you see anything else? Any other creatures or people?
They were horses, but they weren't right either. Like bristled braids over their bodies or something. And there were others, trapped like me. I saw them sometimes, tied up by those metal vines that grew from the trees. They didn't move much.
Did you feel any pain or discomfort?
Not really. More like being stretched thin inside my own head. Like someone was turning me over and over, looking at all the sides of me. It wasn't painful, just exhausting. I felt so empty afterwards.
Empty how?
Like they took something out of me. Something important, but what it was, I don't know. And now there are these gaps in my mind, like missing pieces from a puzzle. Things that were once clear aren't anymore.
The purpose and ultimate goal of the real heaven remain unclear. There is some conjecture to determine the nature of the something extracted from captured subjects during their prolonged imprisonment within the dimension. Further investigation into the imitation angel's telepathic communication patterns may shed light on the specific criteria used for selecting individuals for abduction, as well as the true nature of the realm's purported function. Ongoing research into the purpose of the real heaven focuses on identifying any potential neurological or psychological effects inflicted upon abducted individuals beyond those observed in the above incident, and establishing a correlation between pre-abduction personality traits and duration of captivity.